in agriculture, there are two very important qualities of the sector. The first quality is that the prices are subject to huge fluctuations. That's because the final demand for agricultural goods is generally price inelastic. So, if the slightest variation, then you find the prices shoot up or down. And this is true of all crops. This is true not only of food grains, also of cash crops. Secondly, you find that when the prices crash, generally the effect of this crash is passed on to the peasants, while when the prices shoot up, the peasants don't get a corresponding increase in price. So there's an asymmetry. Intermediaries of various kinds, including multinational corporations and so on. Say in the case of coffee, they are the ones who get the benefits of the increase in price. Because this asymmetry on the one hand and sharp fluctuations on the other, the peasantry is subject to great distress if left to the mercy of the free market. Because of the fact that in years in which the prices crash, they get into debt, and this debt is something that they're not able to clear in years when the prices rise, because they're not getting the benefits of the price rise. And this is something which had happened in India in the 1930s, when there was a Great Depression in the world economy, and that in turn got large masses of Kisans in India into very serious debt. Uh, and because of the, once you get into debt, then peasants become unviable. They cannot pay off the debt, and they have to service the debt, and in the process they lose their land and so on. It's debt is a means of destitution for the peasantry, and this kind of debt. Because of this, during the 1930s, the peasantry suffered greatly. And as a matter of fact, one of the reasons for the taking off of the anti-colonial struggle in that period was that the peasants joined this struggle in large numbers. And one of the promises of the anti-colonial struggle was that come independence, you are never again going to see days like you are seeing today. In fact, this is something which was a part of the country's promise to the peasantry during the anti-colonial struggle. After independence, in fact, there has been at all points of time some kind of price support. In fact, there was price support even for cash crops. The Jute Corporation of India, Cotton Corporation of India, Tea Board, Coffee Board, they all had market intervention roles, so that whenever the prices fell, they would go to the market and buy up. And even cash crops were protected that way, and also food crops. But this was given a proper institutional basis after, in the mid 1960s, when the Green Revolution took off. And one of the conditions for the Green Revolution taking off was the fact that the peasantry got certain assured remunerative prices. Now, that arrangement is something which the Americans or various European Union, various other imperialist countries have been trying to get India to get out of. In fact, they would like us to become, they would like our presence to be dependent on the free market. Now, in the case of cash crops, this has actually happened. You have the tea board, coffee board, and so on and so forth, but they have lost their marketing function. They basically advertise Indian products in the world market and things of that kind, but they do not intervene in the market, which is why among the cash crop growers, there has been a huge spate of suicides. I'm not saying that the suicides have been confined only to cash crop growers, but there's a very heavy incidence of peasant suicides which have happened over the last, since the days of neoliberalism, very heavy incidence among the cash crop growers. But in the case of food grains, notwithstanding all imperialist pressures, the government of India has until now withstood these pressures and a certain system continues. The MSP, or the minimum support price, is not something which has been adequate. As a matter of fact, during the period that the minimum support prices have not grown up, have not gone up, the peasants not only have had to meet higher input costs because of the withdrawal of subsidies on these input prices that the government used to provide earlier, but what is more, even the privatization of education and health and such like essential services has made these extremely expensive as far as the peasants are concerned, and is a very important source of the peasants getting into debt. Therefore, in the case of food crops, even though the peasants were being shortchanged by the government not keeping up the procurement prices or the minimum support prices to the levels to which they should be doing, nonetheless, the arrangement continued. And this arrangement stood the country in very good stead, because you had the despite everything, there was enough food grains in the economy. Now, it's not enough food grains relative to our requirements, because obviously in India, the hunger index, in terms of the hunger index, India is about 100th among 111 countries. So people are desperately hungry. But the reason they are hungry is not because there are not enough food grains, but because there's not enough purchasing power in their hands, because of the absence of employment opportunities and such like, which has come along with neoliberalism. As you know, during the neoliberal period, the rate of growth of employment has grown at a lower rate than before, even though the rate of GDP growth has gone up. People get excited about GDP growth going up during the neoliberal period, but it really means nothing if it is the case that employment growth is not going up, which it has not been. As a matter of fact, I think the rate of growth of employment is less than half what it was. I'm talking about usual status employment, less than half what it was in the pre-neoliberal period. So people are desperately hungry. But on the other hand, at least we have got enough food grains in the government's go down. So the whole point of tackling hunger is to actually put purchasing power in people's hands through things like MG and REGS, and even if not enough jobs are being created. So the minimum support price, which the mechanism of that, which the government has been giving till now, has retained till now, even though people are not getting adequate minimum support price, is something which nonetheless has stood the country in good stead. As a matter of fact, you could see even during this pandemic, when lots of people, lakhs of people were suddenly locked out of their places of residence in cities and trekked back to the villages, immediately at any rate, there was enough food grain stock to the government. Therefore, even though there was a substantial number of deaths, you did not have a situation of famine or anything of that kind. In fact, during this entire period, the arrangement which has been put in place for food grains in terms of the MSP, procurement operations, public distribution system, has really prevented the country for the first time to be free of any kind of famine in that sense, like we used to have in the British period. And the last we had was in the case of Bihar famine in mid-60s, but even that was not as serious as in the colonial period. So there was an arrangement. Now, that arrangement is something which I said, against which there's enormous pressure from the imperialist countries, but that arrangement is something which, while no previous government had decided to give up, the BJP government is deciding to give up. In other words, it has a, a, a kind of inconsiderateness which is unmatched in terms of post-independence Indian history. It's reminiscent of the colonial times when the colonial government of India couldn't care less about what was happening to the peasantry. So it is in this context that we have to look at the minimum support price. That arrangement has to be kept going. And I believe the peasants or the farmers who are actually agitating to keep that arrangement are doing something which is absolutely essential for the country's economy, for the country's food security, and what is more, it is also promised to them as a part of the legacy of our anti-colonial struggle. Some people argue, but look, I mean, okay, if it is the case that we give up all these MSP and so on, the arrangement goes, we can always import food grains from outside. Why do we need to produce it? And secondly, that even if it is the case that corporatization of agriculture takes place and the peasants have to look for jobs outside, so much the better. Why remain overcrowded in the villages and so on? The answer to the first question is that if a country the size of India has to be food secure, then it has to grow its own food, because of the fact that otherwise you'll be completely dependent on imports from these countries, like the US or the EU, which was the case before the Green Revolution happened, which was the case in the late 1960s. Situation was desperate. There was, in fact, the talk was ship to mouth. Food would come from the US in ships and shipped to mouth. Now, we don't want to get back into that. As a matter of fact, many African countries have actually given up their food grain production to produce cash crops, keeping in mind the demands of the advanced countries. But on the other hand, they have also seen huge famines during this period, the like of which we would not like to repeat in our country. Therefore, food security is absolutely essential. When it comes to people, why don't they kind of leave agriculture and go elsewhere? As I told you, that there is a reduction in employment generation. As a matter of fact, let's say between 2004, 5, and 9, 10, when there was an 8.7% growth rate of GDP, the rate of growth of usual status employment, people who actually got some kind of work for 166, no, half the year, was 186, I think it is. 183 days was 0.8% per annum, which was less than the rate of population growth. Therefore, to say that displaced farmers can actually look for employment elsewhere is an utterly ridiculous statement to make, and therefore that is something that does not stand scrutiny. So, from every point of view, from the point of view of food security, from the point of view of ensuring that the farmers do have a certain means of livelihood, they are not thrown in as unemployed persons onto the job market where there are not enough jobs, and also from the point of view of the fact that we have to have, I mean, a dispersion of economic power. We don't want the Ambanis and the Adanis and the corporates to be running our entire economy. It is essential that we actually maintain the arrangement that has brought us so far, that has prevented famines for the last 50 years. And it is in this context that I would just like to make last point, namely that, that many people actually argue that there is an ecological argument. Let's say there is a rise in salinity because states like Punjab are concentrating on food grain production. The answer to that would be that we don't therefore give up food grain production. We don't therefore give up our growing our own food grains to improve food security, but rather we change agronomic practices. There are various agronomic practices available which can actually be tried out, like the system of rice intensification and so on. And on the basis of that, therefore, we should be doing research in order to get rid of the problem of salinity, but we don't, cut off our head to get rid of a cold. So I think it's very important that we actually continue to retain all these arrangements that we have. I think I should stop there. Thank you very much.